while I was in Norway meeting with Corey, I had the opportunity to see a show by the artist Lasse Arikstad, who is a young artist from Kristiansand in Norway, who had a show in Bergen. Here you see a work from that show, which was at Palmera Gallery, called The Best Thing About Business is Minding Your Own. It was a poster series that Lasse hung around Bergen, and I'm quite proud to now own this work you see here in my small collection. But to me, it's a very strong message. I think it plays off of this. There's this like widespread phenomenon around this with how much you share and how much you brag and how much you gloat, which I would say for me, at least at the university level and more in my more academic background, there was I would say an overwhelming amount of that sort of like subtle self-promotion. And I really like how Lasse's work counteracts that in a very declarative, simple statement, says that perhaps it's better if we turn inwards rather than look outwards. Okay, so sticking with this sort of this younger generation of artists working in Europe and who are quite adept with new technology, Niko Abramadis N, which also go by the pseudonym Entity Network. Niko Abramadis was the winner of the German Ars Viva Prize in 2019. And much of his work is built around this idea of crypto languages, which is built off of cryptocurrencies. He is a trader in several cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, etc. And a lot of his work is built around this sort of new hieroglyphic languages that form around emergent technologies. So I'll do a quick scroll through some of his projects. This was at Kunstmuseum in Bern. But the work I wanted to hone in on, we will see in a second, is this one, Privacy of Correspondence, from 2017. With the Illuminati eye coming out of the top flap of the envelope. I think this, for me, there's an incredible wanderlust associated with analog technologies. I think there's a magic in the fact that I can spend 75 cents on a stamp in Kiev, and then anywhere between 2 weeks and 6 weeks later, a little piece of paper will show up in my parents' mailbox or my friend's mailbox or something like this. And there's so much I don't understand about how that little piece of paper gets from point A to point B. And of course, there's some sort of Illuminati component to that. And I think this work by Niko Abramadis taps into this sort of cult-like aspects, which to me are quite potent. And then I would be remiss not to talk about the Croatian artist Nora Torado, who has been on an absolute tear in the past 3 years in the realm of performance art, in conceptual art. I'm I quite love this limited edition silk scarf that she published a few years ago in 2018. To scroll, scroll, to scroll, scroll. It makes me think of all the scrolls still rolled up. For me, I think, especially within the past month, you see how these new vocabularies can consume you, with these words like pandemic and plague, etc. And I think scroll is certainly one of these words which has been a defining word of 2020, 2019, 2018, yada, yada, yada. And I think more so than any other artworks I've seen, Nora deducts that to the absolute essence and makes that juxtaposition between contemporary culture and ancient civilizations. I will admit, too, as someone who does like to collect work, this was one of these ones that got away. I had opportunity to buy it, and I passed, and I will forever loathe that mistake. Nora is currently in control of the video board outside of MGK Siegen in Siegen, Germany, where she posts her messages there, a new message every day. I like a lot this message from a few weeks ago. It seems the ice cream licked back. Yes, indeed, I would agree completely. And then I will stick on this message. I saw this post today, which I think has bearing on a lot of this scroll phenomenon. Talentless but connected. I will kind of leave this hanging in the air. But for sure, there's this balance between exposure and understanding, which is, I certainly would say, I try to consume as much information as possible, but there's this balance between like scale of content versus expertise, and that's definitely something I find myself trying to balance as someone kind of beginning their professional life. Okay, sticking with these sorts of word games, one of my favorite Ukrainian graffiti artists is Igor from Odessa. Igor is, I would say, absolutely the king of the Odessa graffiti community. I think this post is particularly smart. Everything you like, I liked 5 years ago. There's this, and this, especially with this juxtaposition with the Papa Smurf character, this thin line between mass culture and pop culture, or sorry, mass culture and subculture. To get in on the ground floor at a subculture feels very cool, and there's this guilt associated or like pessimism associated with when subculture becomes mass culture. And I think when you use that in the domain of graffiti, it's quite smart. And I think all of Igor's work is quite smart in that way, taking these very simple messages and using them to boost his own persona. Okay, now we are really in Ukrainian territory. I have had absolute privilege of being based in Kiev since last August, and as mentioned before, one of my best friends here is Ukrposhta, the nationalized Ukrainian mail system. Ukrposhta is one of those fickle friends that loves to test you and loves to really play these games where it'll frustrate you by having an hour-long wait, but then it'll have a social media feed which is just positively brilliant. I will share a few of these posts. I think whoever is doing the graphic design at Ukrposhta deserves every award. I think this is particularly great. This limited edition stamp series from 2019 with viral cats. I could talk forever about this stamp series, but I will kind of try to summarize by saying, postcards might not be the sexiest format in 2020, but Ukrposhta does a great job introducing viral hits into an antiquated medium and making antiquated viral again. And I mean, come on, who could not love these cats? They are too good. And then before we move on, we will collectively enjoy one more post by Ukrposhta. This is again this Ukrposhta Break the Internet thing, which, come on. I mean, she's my hero. So that's that. While in Ukraine, I have personally doubled down on making the postcard medium into an integral part of my personal research. And so every person I meet over the course of my research, I invite them to write something onto a postcard. And here you see on the left, this is Igor, the postcard that he chose, which I quite like. And on the right, you see a manipulation that the Dnipro-based magazine Nash, that they did on a postcard published by Jump, a contemporary art platform in Poltava. But I think this is a project that is in process, and I would say has become as a project that I don't see having an endpoint with inviting people I talk with to write something on a postcard. There's a infinite thrill on my behalf in seeing people's handwriting, seeing people's the speed with which they're able to respond and conceive of a response. And I think there's also a time capsule component to a postcard that a text message cannot achieve. So I will show you briefly some of the postcards I've accumulated thus far, which I think have some of the more significant substance to them. So the first is one that Nikita Kadan wrote while I was interviewing about him about the Committive Initiative with Leo Trusenko, Zhenya Molyar, and the whole Denedek community led throughout 2019, which for me was the most interesting contemporary art initiative in Ukraine that I have experienced thus far. And on this postcard, which shows the main hall at the Evazovsky Museum in Crimea, occupied Crimea. Nikita Kadan wrote Return Crimea to Kmitiv. It's, I think, a strong moment, a time-sensitive moment, and I think it's an enduring moment. Another one, this is from Viktor Kochetov, a Kharkiv-based photographer, talking about these sorts of strange folk imagery, which tends to loom large in stereotypical representations of Ukraine, but is divorced from the economic and really legitimate reality of on-the-ground life. This sort of Parajanov era folk image is not an enduring image. I think I also really like this card that Alexei Romanesco, a Kiev-based, Poltava-raised filmmaker, did, showing what was originally the Lenin Museum, which is now Ukrainian House, and which is being discussed as a candidate for the new Ukrainian Museum of Contemporary Art. On the verso, Alexei has written Slava Iskustvo, or Glory to Art. It's worth emphasizing that this is Glory to Art in the Russian language, not in the Ukrainian language. And I think it's pretty striking to see Ukrainian flag, former Soviet museum, new Ukrainian National Museum, still getting embedded in these sorts of titular problems between what things are called and what things actually say and what the message is. And then, I mean, I would say also, it's also cool for me to get these memories of people that I would say this notion of two ships passing in the night is something that has become a rather recurring notion in my everyday reality of late. Trying to figure out what I can pull out of these short-term encounters. And this is a postcard that Volodymyr Bykov, the city architect for Sumy, wrote, talking about the stadium that he designed in the city. So that's quite special. And then I would say this medium has this format of being a documentary or being conceptual. Here is Pavlo Kovac from Vykrita Grupa. He, on a card which says invitation, he sketched out a gallery and invites readers of the postcard to design their own exhibition. I think it's worth mentioning that part of my my struggle with this postcard project is that it's quite difficult to find postcards for sale showing contemporary Ukraine. The absolute dominant share of the postcard market is postcards printed more than 30 years ago during the Soviet Union. And often those postcards say Radyanska Ukraina rather than independent Ukraine. And that's, I think, a strange phenomenon. It probably has something to do with, you know, the postcard production is built in response to tourism and a desire for those sorts of cards or images. But I can say, like, in Kiev today, like, there's one company that supplies postcards to all the hotels in the city. And so before I got tuned into some of the more alternative streams of flea markets, etc., there was a singular vision of contemporary Ukraine oriented towards a tourism audience. And that's a company called the Atlas, which is based at Holisivka metro station. And it's interesting in that I am here to study contemporary art and contemporary topics and contemporary discourses, but the Soviet legacy is inherent and saturates all that I do, and it also, I would say, saturates a lot of like the online discussion. So pages like this for nostalgia, which have thousands of followers, which are showing these old Soviet era images. I wish Maidan Nezalezhnosti was this green and this lush. It is not, but I still think a contemporary image should exist and should be accessible.